Well, and the committee should have this with the selection committee. They should have gotten a little bit of lube before they decided to fuck Seton Hall and fuck the Big East. So this, unfortunately, is going to be a somber episode of Hoist the Colors, especially coming off a tough Big East tournament, which ultimately proved to be a tough weekend for the entire conference as a whole. Thanks for tuning in. I know this will be an entertaining episode for a number of reasons. But I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden. Let before we even get to the NCAA tournament debacle, I mean, let's just quickly just go over the St. John's game and just peel it off like a band-aid. Started off great, 3-point shots were falling, but then once they stopped falling, they started falling for St. John's, and from there it was just an avalanche. And St. John's showed why they had won 5 straight and were on the roll that they were on going into this tournament.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's more to say about that game than, has already been said? I think that they took what Rick Pitino told them after the loss to Seton Hall out on Long Island, the heart. Pitino was saying all week how Seton Hall was the tougher team, how his team had to bring some physicality, and they did, to their credit. Chris Ledlam played better than he's played any other game this season. Joel Soriano had a double-double, and I don't think he didn't do that in the game in Newark, and he barely did it in the game out in Long Island. So tip your hat to them. They were the better team on that day. That's and for whatever reason, Seton Hall did what they did in a bunch of other games, which came back to haunt them yesterday, where for whatever reason they couldn't stay in games and make them competitive. And then you get these big losses. The big losses we know in the Big East Conference, on the road to Connecticut, on the road to Creighton, on the road to Marquette, and then some of the other losses during the season. The game out in Baylor back in December, even the game against Iowa on the back end of the San Diego tournament, where they lose by double figures. And then Thursday is exhibit F or G or whatever exhibit you want about how there were games when Seton Hall lost touch with an opponent, they never really came back on them and got a double-digit loss dropped on them.
And the thing, and another great example was getting beat by 20 at Xavier, coming off beating UConn by 15. And by the way, I mean, I'm gonna reference that win over UConn at some point when I just absolutely unload on the selection committee, and rightfully so. But honestly, if it wasn't for honestly, I'm hoping this is a unicorn, a one-off. If it wasn't for the crazy bid stealing that we saw this past weekend with North Carolina State, Oregon, um, Duquesne out of the A10, UAB out of the American. Um, if it wasn't for that, I don't think Seton Hall would have had to sweat it out. But unfortunately, that's what happened. And to make matters worse, I mean, I knew this bracket was going to be a complete joke about 5 minutes into the selection show when they revealed Florida Atlantic with 2 quad 4 losses, I think, at least one for sure, as an 8 seed. Just, I knew right there it was going to be a joke. And then it kept going. I'm like, we're going to get left out. I probably knew that by the time it showed that Virginia was in. That's when I knew, we got no shot. We're going to get screwed, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean that's we could spend 3 hours bad mouthing the resumes of the teams that made the play in, who you conceivably believe are the last 4 at-large teams to get in. Virginia, Texas A&M, Boise State, Colorado, and you want to add Florida Atlantic and Michigan State into the mix. That's sort of, of course, then you get to the guy who runs the selection committee, the commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, this guy named Charles McClellan,
That's
who,
Dr. Charles McClellan to
oh,
you.
excuse me, Dr. Charles McClellan. I didn't mean to laugh, but the guy, oh, you want to, he tries, there's a meme out there of, I think, I don't watch the show, but it's a meme, this guy, apparently a character, ironically enough, named Charlie, from a show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh yeah.
And he does this thing where, I guess for whatever reason, he does his conspiracy theory about how something happens. And he's got all these red lines pointed. And you could
Yeah.
take the stuff that Dr. McClellan has said about how this team got in and this team got out, and it just smells of, I'm trying to justify why this mediocre, but I mean, to be fair, for 10 seconds, the same could be said if Seton Hall, St. John's, and Providence got in. People who are rooting for those schools are going to say the same exact thing. This is, unfortunately, you get into this I guess you get into the situation once every maybe 10 years. I think the last time Seton Hall was on the bubble and got burst was 2012.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, there were a couple of bad losses. They lose to DePaul, who was not very good that year. And I think they lost a home game to Rutgers.
Yep.
At the end of the regular season. So, at that point, as much as it hurt not to make that tournament, there were things which were easily, okay, don't lose to Rutgers the last game of the season at home. Don't do that. You could point to that. I mean, if you want to, people want to sit there and point a mirror at Seton Hall and say, don't get blown out by St. John's. And, then I could turn around and say, yeah, but we beat them twice out of 3 games.
Yep.
B, we finished 2 games ahead of them in the standings. And C, we have more quad win. We beat better teams in the Big East than St. John's did. We went 2-4 against the 3 NCAA teams, as opposed to St. John's, who went 1-5. This is not including St. John's has lost to UConn on Friday night, by the way. But in the regular season, we go 2-4, they go 1-5. So explain that to me. And I guess we really but it is why ultimately St. John's was not the reason why we got left out. It was somebody else's fault. So we'll take it at that.
So to piggyback off of what you mentioned with Dr. McClellan and his justification for leaving Seton Hall, St. John's, and Providence out. The first blip I saw was, I believe Zach Braziller tweeted it about St. John's, about how their quad 1 record was what kept them out. And they had 4 quad 1 wins. Virginia had 2. 2-6. 4-10's not great. 2-6 is a lower winning percentage than 4-10. And not to mention 4-2 quad 1 wins. And not to mention, apparently, the eye test doesn't exist anymore, apparently, because, I mean, if you watch the ACC tournament, and I'm really embarrassed to admit that I did, Virginia needed overtime to beat Boston College in the quarterfinals. That's a tournament team doesn't need overtime to beat Boston College in a conference tournament quarterfinal. And they also don't blow a lead to North Carolina State by missing free throws in regulation up by 3 and then allowing a miracle shot to force overtime. They shot themselves in the foot. Virginia knew they weren't a tournament team. Look at how they reacted to seeing their name called yesterday. Watch the video. It shows that even they know they don't deserve it. It blows my mind, man. Oh my God.
I mean, again, I can't. I want racking the schedule to see. I guess they beat Florida, and they beat Texas. And this is Virginia. They beat Florida, they beat Texas A&M, but other than that, I mean, they didn't beat anybody good in the ACC. They didn't beat I guess they beat Clemson. Okay, but again, it's and of course, then you see tweets, and it's really funny. You know, we talk a lot during the conference season about your rivals are Marquette, Creighton, Villanova, St. John's, Providence, so on and so forth. You rattle off the other 10 teams in the Big East. But then there's the other then there's a bigger picture of if you're thinking you're a bubble team, look at all these other schools. You hear about people on the bubble, not on the bubble, so on and so forth. This is why one of your guests from the Igloo, Jonathan Warner, making the madness, is he does such a good job with his daily bracketology. And he points out all of these important games starting, let's say, middle of January, where he will post the scores of every game that's involved in the team who may or may not be under NCAA at-large consideration. So again, and Brian Franklin put this very well when we had him on a guest about a month ago. As much as you want to watch, let's say, USC because you want to see your game go up to be a quad two, the other games that are maybe more important are the games against teams he might be playing against for one of the last at-large spaces. Nobody watched Virginia because nobody took Virginia seriously. And I guess nobody took Virginia seriously until Virginia's name got called yesterday. And everyone wrote Texas A&M off. But again, once you start seeing people start putting Texas A&M in the bracket and making a justification for them to make the tournament, then you got to take them. Nobody was taking Texas A&M seriously because everyone thought they were just going to go through another run-of-the-mill, barely over 500 overall season, and they end up getting one of the last at-large bids. So, that's just something that, I don't know what the answer for. There's an answer if we want to talk about it for the people who are in charge of making the schedule on Shaheen Holloway's staff. And what input he gets from Brian Felt, the athletic director, or whoever. I mean, that's question number one. How do you schedule in the future to sort of adjust to how you perceive the NCAA tournament committee is going to select the team? But from a fan's perspective, it's sort of, we don't talk about, nobody takes seriously who are going to make it as at-large teams until you get till the second week in March, when in reality, there are games being played. There are games being played in January, February, and even before that from teams who could be a threat to grab an at-large spot over a team like Seton Hall, who ended up on the bubble.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, Seton Hall 13-7 in the Big East. Virginia had the same conference record too, and the Big East was the second best conference in the country per KenPom from top to bottom. I mean, they would be number one if Georgetown and DePaul weren't weighing the rest of the league down. And you mean to tell me that the third best team from the ACC is better than the third best team from the Big East? The Big East being the clear-cut better of the two conferences. You mean to tell me Virginia deserved to get in over Seton Hall when Seton Hall played a tougher conference schedule and won 13 games and beat your number one overall seed UConn? And by the way, here's another thing regarding Dr. McClellan and his justification. You want to make the argument like, okay, their best non-conference win was Missouri. Like, okay, whatever. For him to discredit Seton Hall's win over UConn by saying, oh, Donovan Clingan got hurt. Seton Hall was already up like 8 to 10 points or whatever it was when Clingan got hurt. Clingan's presence in the game wasn't gonna matter. Seton Hall was gonna win that game. So to try to say that Seton Hall wasn't gonna win because of that injury, it's just egregious. To me, it violates the Geneva Convention. That is terrible. That's a war crime. And I take that personally.
Well, I don't. I think again, I just, I don't want to. It is what I mean. It's clear. One thing I said is we need to get some people on that committee who actually watch basketball and who actually know what's. I get that we have athletic directors on the committee, and you might think these people watch basketball, but let's be honest, they're and you know this as well as anybody because you've traveled, you've been to the Big East tournament, particularly the women's tournament. You've run into some of these athletic directors. They have 10 other things going on besides. I mean, I'm sure they watch most of the men's basketball games and the women's basketball games, but they have 20 other things going on, and they can't really. How can you tell me that you watch enough basketball to tell me whether one team is better than the other team? Maybe we need to get some people, like maybe you want to get some former coaches on. You want to get some former coaches, you want to get some former players. Let's get some people who have actually been in contact with the game. And maybe you get the same result. But at least then you don't get people like Dr. McClellan trying to play mental gymnastics over, okay, we let Michigan State in because they have 3 quad wins and so on and so forth. We kept Providence out as an example, who have 6 quad. You can't tell me I let Michigan in because they had quad 1 wins and then discount a Providence team that had double the number of quad 1 wins to Michigan State. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, that's just sort of unfortunate. And the question becomes, you know, is the NCAA at the end of the day, and I blame the NCAA, are they so tone deaf and their attitude is, we don't care what 68 teams get in, as long as the tournament gets played, we don't care that our selection process stinks. Or they just basically say, you know what, there's always going to be people who are going to gripe about it. If it's not the Big East teams this year, 3 other teams next year are going to spend Monday afternoon, Monday morning quarterbacking, so to say, what the selection committee does. So I think it's sort of, it just speaks to sort of sometimes how tone deaf the NCAA is, that all this criticism is out there and they basically just perceive themselves to be above the fray. And it's sort of like, oh, we're going to do it our way regardless. You're all going to watch this thing, and so what?
And by the way, I mean, let's not gloss over the fact that Dr. McClellan, there's legit video of him talking about, like Providence didn't meet these certain things. And the word I know he was trying to use was metrics, but he kept using the word matrix. I just I just think that is so funny, and it just hammers home the point of how incompetent he and the rest of the committee was, especially. And I hate that I'm throwing this guy under the bus. And maybe not, but Barry Collier, the Butler AD, he's basically the lone ranger who can vouch for the Big East, and he just didn't do shit. I mean, he allowed you know other the ACC commissioner, other people from these Power Five institutions to bang the table until they got what they wanted. And Collier probably just sat back and like, I'm retiring as the Butler AD this year, so like, what do I got to do? Like, he didn't do shit. Like, the Big East is the second best conference in the country according to Ken Pom. There's no way you can tell me that they're only worth 3 NCAA tournament bids. Bare minimum, there should have been 5. My process was Seton Hall and St. John's, either both of them get in or none of them get in. And clearly, the committee chose the greater of 2 evils compared to the lesser of 2 evils.
Well, the greatest.
The
I mean,
greatest. Yes.
They had They had basically, they could have taken all 3. They could have taken 2. They could have taken 1. They could have taken none. And of course, if you take 1 or 2, then you could have debates until Thursday afternoon or whenever one of those teams plays between who, and then we'll have debates afterwards. Like, let's assume for the sake of argument, St. John's got in, and they're playing, of all teams, let's say Virginia, just for the purposes of the entertainment portion of this. St. John's draws Virginia on Tuesday night in Dayton, and St. John's loses to Virginia. And everyone knows Virginia. Everyone, look, Virginia is one of the they play the most boring, unentertaining brand of basketball in the sport. And if you look at their resume to compare it to Seton Hall's, for example, they have a bunch of really bad losses. They lost at Duke to 25. They lost at the Pitts. They lost to Virginia Tech by 34. They lose to Wake Forest by 19. So they have as many bad losses in conference than Seton Hall does. And then if you turn around and have Virginia beat St. John's in a playing game, then you could go on for days about how do you take St. John's over Providence and Seton Hall. So unfortunately, you get the situation where none of them get in, and now you've got everyone on Big East Twitter going after Collier, going after McClellan, and and people are going to go after Val Ackerman. Because ultimately she's the one who gets asked, well, who would you take as your representative on the selection committee? And she chooses Collier. And I don't know if at the time Collier had announced his retirement, but there were rumblings when he hired Thad Matta 2 years ago to take over for LaVall Jordan that this was basically going to be his last important act. So there are people from Butler who are saying, well, Collier's about to retire when he hired basically the last thing he was going to do, which it wasn't, but like his last major act as athletic director was going to be to hire Thad Matta to take over the basketball team. So in reality, that's I think I think it's on the one hand a very Val Ackerman type. I'm a nice person. I try to be a class act by letting a retiring AD on the NCAA selection committee, but it's missing the forest for the trees. Whereas you need someone in the room who's going to be as aggressive as some of these other, like for example, the athletic director from Alabama's in the room.
Yep.
For darn sure that I don't know his name off the top of my head. I'll figure it out. For darn sure though.
Yeah, and by the way, also the Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director of North Carolina, like they threw him and the rest of the ACC a bone.
Yeah, I mean these people know what they're doing. These people don't. These big time ads. The 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 NCAA selection committee is child's play compared to the stuff the NIL. Greg Byrne is the name of the Alabama guy, by the way. You're telling me you throw, look, I don't. Every Butler person I've interacted with on Twitter tells me Barry Collier is the nicest guy in the world. He's an alum. He bleeds Butler blue. Fine, all in good. But you're going to bring that guy in to tackle guys like Greg Byrne and Bubba Cunningham. I mean, he's going to get swallowed alive. I mean, bringing a guy like Steve Napolino up to Providence. Bring in David Benedict of Connecticut.
Yeah, David Benedict, out of all the 11 ADs in the Big East, David Benedict, and we know his social media presence, he's the one who could hang with those other, athletic directors and conference commissioners, whatever. He is the best equipped to hang with them and to get what he wants and what the conference wants. And how Barry Collier got into that over Benedict or even Knapp at Providence, I will never know that. And quite frankly, I don't want to know.
It's because he's retiring and Val Ackerman was giving him a lifetime achievement award. I mean, that's a question of Val Ackerman's going to have to answer at some point. Somebody's going to have to go to Big East Media Day and hopefully remember this in March. We're talking about it in March, but this is something she needs to be asked in October and say, how is he your choice to get on a selection committee from the Big East, as opposed to other athletic directors who are younger, who are, who are sort of in the battle on a day. Not that he's not, but again, he's retiring. So, and somebody, I can't believe somebody would tell me that Barry Collier's going to fight because he's leaving. No, he's not going to care because again, come July 1st, he doesn't have to hear from Mike Craig, Brian Felt, or Steve Napolito anymore. He's basically off to retirement someplace and just, enjoying the sun or whatever the story is, where he's left his colleagues, he's left his colleagues, flying in the wind, so to speak. So, but again, I just think it's as much his fault for being bad and not aggressive presumably not aggressive in the committee room. But then it's also on Val Ackerman for choosing him to begin with. But look, Val Ackerman has not made a lot of mistakes in her almost 11 years as Big East commissioner. The Big East owes the fans and the teams owe her a debt because she's made almost every move right. But this one she got wrong. And again, hopefully she'll put herself out to be accountable for this. Hopefully somebody that, as much as people are saying she should be out there complaining to the selection committee, that's not really her style.
Right.
But at the end of the day, when on the number of times, I can count on my hand the number of times she really faces the media during the year. Maybe on one of these occasions, somebody will have the guts to say, why'd you put Barry Collier on the committee? And we'll see what answer we'll see if and what answer she gives to that question.
So, this is gonna sound terrible, but what Val Ackerman's alma mater is?
She's from Virginia.
Yep. And I'm not gonna throw a conspiracy theory around, but like, it's just a weird coincidence. But now, I mean, speaking of Val Ackerman, I know that's not her style to, go into the public shaming realm. But I mean, look, the ACC commissioner, he went scorched earth after the college football playoff committee left Florida State out. Like, if the ACC commissioner is doing it, Val, I promise you, no one will care if you called out the selection committee and pleaded your case to have Seton Hall and St. John's and even Providence included in the field of 68. No one would have cared because the precedent has been set by the ACC commissioner and even Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC. Like, he's done the same thing. All these other Power 5 commissioners have done the same thing, while Val Ackerman has been radio silence. And honestly, and I'm going to hammer this home by saying silence is complicity. Like, they are taking this sitting down. I mean, and I was in the UConn space last night. Hurley Mania and Hot Balls, for that matter, went on rants for the ages. Hurley Mania saying it's show business, not show friends. We're not here to make friends anymore. This is the Big East. Look at how the reaction was. 19,812 people every single session last week. If that doesn't tell you that it seems like the only people that, and again, Hurley Mania said this, seem like the only people that care about the Big East are the fans. Like, I mean, and they brought up the point. The last time the official Big East Conference Twitter handle tweeted something, it was last week, 9 days ago, and it was for something for cross country or track and field. And not to mention, Fanta was supposed to host a Big East Twitter space after Selection Sunday, and that got completely canceled. And Fanta had to do his own space that he started at like 12:30 in the morning or something like that. And then apparently, I don't know how I got a hold of this information, but apparently John Paquette, he believes that they want to handle things internally and all that stuff. Like, silence is complicity. Like, when it comes to something like this, when you get wronged to this extent, you can't just be silent more. You can't take this shit lying down. You got to fight back.
Well, let's make one other point though, is to get back to something. I don't want to repeat what I just said here, but again, if Ackerman takes an aggressive position about how she dislikes the committee, does she then in turn have to throw Barry Collier under the bus? Does she, and that's again, that's the type of thing, if you look at her mentor, of course, is David Stern,
Yep.
the late great commissioner of the NBA, who basically took a league that was dead and made it, made it a very basketball is the NBA is now very close to second to Major League Baseball in terms of the major leagues. So David Stern, made the NBA basically what it is. And David Stern was not the type of guy who would overtly call people out. His style was more about, I want to, and David Stern is an attorney, and David Stern, and so is Val Ackerman, by the way. They basically try to convince their clients, so to speak, to sort of play the game as opposed to calling their clients out, so to speak. A lot of what David Stern did was all under the radar, you know, and then luckily for him, everything worked out, and and he got his place sort of on the Mount Rushmore of sports commissioners. So Val Ackerman is learning how to conceivably learning how to do this under David Stern, and she knows at the end of the day, either that doesn't mean she shouldn't do it, by the way, but she knows at the end of the day that if she takes pot shots at the committee, she's also got to face the question of, well, your person on the committee didn't do a very good job. So what does you criticize the committee, but what does that say about you? Where your role in creating this, the person you put up there was terrible and was predictably going to be terrible because he's checked out. Again, I don't see. If Butler people hear this, and I don't know if they will or not, or maybe I'll tag a couple of them, because I don't want to antagonize the Butler people who love Barry Collier. But on the other hand, I can't believe a Butler person isn't going to say that at the end of the day they have an explanation for how Barry Collier performed in his committee. I don't, because obviously this guy is halfway to the golf course right now, and this is who Val Ackerman puts up on the committee. So unfortunately, the Big East can, as many fingers as the Big East can point as to how bad this committee is. When you point, I think when you point when you point the finger at somebody, three fingers point back at you. So it's in that vein. And I hope I don't know if you ever go to Big East Media Day again, but I hope that some people who I know will, guys like Jerry Carino, guys like Jaden Daly, couple maybe a couple, maybe David Borges, who writes for, I think he writes for I don't think he writes for the Hartford Courant, but he writes for a newspaper. We know these types of guys go to Media Day, and hopefully one of them will have the cojones to ask Val Ackerman, what happened. And we'll see what type of, we'll see if in the 6 or 7 months she has to formulate an answer, what that answer is going to be.
And the funny thing is, Val Ackerman's the commissioner of the Big East, but over the last 24 hours or so, not even 24, but like the last 18 hours, give or take, the people who have been carrying the Big East flag have been the coaches. I love Kim English for calling out the analytics being bullshit, and they are. Like, and I mean, that the analytics that they use, that is, the net shouldn't be the end all be all, because Seton Hall's net was in the 60s. It wasn't great. Like if you're looking on that alone, Seton Hall's not a tournament team. But again, the eye test should still be a thing. I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but come on, the eye test has to account for something. Like you can't just have a bunch of people in that room that barely watch any basketball or really know the game. Like if you had like for example, if Jay Wright was in that room, I guarantee he would politic. I mean, he politicked on the sidelines. I mean, he was GQJ. He was getting the Noble whistle. He'd be getting a Noble whistle in the room by vouching for the Big East. And Rick Pitino also saying, the metrics that they use, they're all fraudulent, because how do you leave St. John's and Seton Hall out there? Because these metrics are garbage. It's just, The fact that
I mean,
again,
you and I could find this. You and I could find a committee of people who deserve to could form a objective selection committee. And maybe this goes to good old Charlie Baker, who was just named president of the NCAA about a year ago. Maybe Charlie Baker needs to stare this thing square in the eye and say that. But again, the question is, would he perceive this thing to be not working? Because every measurement he's got to be up to, it doesn't really matter. I mean, are people not going to? Is there going to be a mass boycott of the Big East of the NCAA tournament in New York City and New England because the selection committee screwed 3 teams from that part of the country? Probably not. Am I going to fill a bracket out and enter it into a couple of pools over the next few days? I probably will. you know. So, again, the problem is that for what they want, they're gonna get well, TV ratings depend on, and this is also part of the problem. TV ratings depend on who's in the games, you know, but the fact is there's going to be a lot of people watching Thursday and Friday. There's going to be a lot of people gambling on it. There's still going to be people putting stuff in the NCAA pools and in NCAA contests. So the metrics that Charlie Baker, the guy who runs the NCAA, cares about are all still going to fall into place. So then when people who are trying to defend the Big East say, change the way the committee is done, change the people on the committee, it's not going to bother him until he sees a hit in, the attendance, the ratings, and the interest in the NCAA tournament. And this has happened. Unfortunately, this happens all the time. I mean, we joke about everyone's good old friend Jim Boeheim, who every year he didn't make the tournament, he would complain. He's got gripes from 20 years ago when he didn't make the NCAA tournament, and nobody changed anything because Jim Boeheim would be upset every 4 years that his team was one of the last 4 in. So, that's, I mean, part of that's the beauty of the NCAA tournament, to sort of take the flip side of this. Part of the beauty of the whole thing is that there are going to be schools and fan bases who are mad that they get left out. Unfortunately, Seton Hall has to be the team that's just like if you go back to 1989, somebody has to lose the championship game.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's just the way sports are. There's always a winner and there's always a loser. And right now, Seton Hall is the loser because of what happened in the selection process. And again, we could go on probably till tip off on Tuesday night going over everything. I mean, and we'll probably spend time before we wrap up our season here explaining what Seton Hall can do better.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, there are probably a couple of things. We hinted upon the possibility of changing the schedule, but I also do think there are a couple, we're not talking, you and I are honest enough to know that the roster was not immaculately constructed.
Right.
There are reasons why we got blown out by 19 points in 6 of our games this season. There are reasons for that, but that's a different topic for a different day. We have, I guess the transfer portal has opened up. So there's going to be a few weeks while people fill their rosters out to sort of take a look at what do you have to do in order to build a better product going forward, so that instead of walking into the committee room 20-12 and 65 in the net, maybe you walk in 22-10 and 45 in the net, and this is not an issue the next time you go in front of the selection committee.
So two things I want to add to points you made about, like, first off, about the ratings and whatnot. Like, if you want to show how much you just despise the fact that Virginia is in the tournament, I won't be watching that game. Like, that's how I'll protest. Like literally, fuck Tony Bennett, fuck Virginia for playing the most egregiously terrible style of basketball. In the year of our Lord 2024, he's still playing the pack line defense. They haven't been interesting since they lost to UMBC and then somehow redeemed themselves to win the national championship the year after that. They haven't been worth a damn. I mean, look what happened. They blew it against Furman. Like they had that game won and they blew it because Kie Clark's like, like that's our win. Like the SpongeBob meme, like that. Say that's your ice cream. Like that's my ice cream. Now let him have it. You can have it. Like that. They gave the win to Furman, but that's beside the point. How I want to boycott? Don't watch the Virginia Colorado State game. Like that's your only way to tell them. Like no one cares about Virginia. You made a mistake. Don't tune into the game because the ratings. People are if it shows they're bad, the front office and the NCAA's are like, oh, they must not like that. Like, yeah, no shit, we don't like it. Hell, even I hope some of the Xavier contingency. I know that they were nowhere near a tournament bid, but Cincinnati's not that far from Dayton. So if you're in that area, make the trip to Dayton tomorrow and just have justice for the Big East signs. I forgot what the rallying cry that KY Muskie had, but it's super catchy. It was like, like something of like a worker strike, like catchphrase. Like I forgot what it was, but it would be so funny if you have a bunch of Big East fans go to Dayton and have those signs saying "Justice for the Big East." How's the tournament committee looking orange? That would be so funny. And then the set and speaking of ratings, the other point I wanted to make in terms of Seton Hall and St. John's getting in over Virginia and maybe Michigan State or even like Colorado. Let's just say Virginia and Colorado State. Let's just go right there. So you want to talk about bringing in ratings, right? You want to have the personalities and names. St. John's is a name brand with a name brand Hall of Fame head coach in Rick Pitino. Seton Hall, not as well known, obviously, but you had the coach who 2 years ago was America's darling for 2 weeks, Shaheen Holloway, as he led St. Peter's, little tiny St. Peter's out of Jersey City, to the Elite Eight. You mean to tell me that people don't want to see Shaheen Holloway and Rick Pitino being feisty and the characters they are on the sidelines and on the microphone, if they advance in the tournament? I mean, who wouldn't want to see that? I mean, Pitino and Shaheen are two undeniable personalities, and you want to see that as a fan. You want to see them be animated characters, the animated characters that they are and always have been on the sidelines as the general of their teams, taking their armies into battle with their season on the line in the hopes of winning a national championship. I don't want to, no offense to Colorado State, but more so, I don't give a fuck if I offend any Virginia fans or the University of Virginia. My brother lived in Charlottesville for a few years, so I will take all the pleasure in saying that I don't give a fuck about Virginia. They don't deserve to be in. They know they didn't deserve to be in. Just again, watch the reaction. I feel bad about Colorado State. They had a better case. I mean, they blew Creighton out in November. So take that for what it's worth. But there's no way you can tell me that they would rather see Tony Bennett and the pack line defense than Shaheen Holloway and his feisty personality at Seton Hall, and in turn, Rick Pitino, Hall of Fame head coach, with his personality, and St. John's with him saying how he wanted to jump in the East River if he doesn't win a national championship, saying every time he loses, he wants to kill himself. I mean, why wouldn't you want that? And why would you take a boring Virginia team over Shaw and Pitino causing a media frenzy with especially with the New York and New Jersey markets? I mean, I will never understand that to this day. And quite frankly, I don't want to because it's going to make me want to throw up.
Yeah, again, that's unfortunately, at the end of the day, it becomes sort of like a back. Particularly, I hate to say it with the football schools. I think it's all about I'll pat your back, you pat mine. If the day ever comes when, and the other thing you got to worry about with the football schools in particular, and this gets to Michigan State, Virginia, and Texas A&M, is that they have to, for everyone to get, and right now one of the biggest hot potatoes in college sports is the college football playoff. They're trying to figure out how many schools are ultimately going to make it and how they're going to figure out who gets in. And right now, the Big Ten and the SEC in particular want to get advantages on that in that selection process. But they need the ACC and the Big 12 and maybe to a lesser extent the Mountain West to go along with them. So that if, at the guys we talked about, the ADs at, places like Alabama, if they want to get the type of selection for the football playoff, they need to throw a bone somewhere, somehow, to their friends in the ACC, their friends in the Big 12, and their friends in the Mountain West. Because ultimately, the Mountain West the Mountain West doesn't have a lot of power in this, but darn well that they're going to have to say, well, we let a small conference football school give them a chance to make the playoff, and that's a sop to the Mountain West. And they say, all right, you know what? We'll let you bring a couple of your mediocre basketball teams who probably like Boise State and Colorado State, who are probably going to lose in the first round. But, that's fine. You guys are happy you got your NCAA bids. They don't care about the Big East because the Big East doesn't play football. The Big East has no say as to how the football playoff is done, which is all Greg Byrne, the AD at Alabama, cares about. He wants to make sure he gets in that tournament every year by hook or by crook. So if he has to throw a bone to the ACC, he has to throw a bone to the Mountain West. Because that's how politics work. I scratch your back by letting you cover your basketball teams in the NCAA tournament. You scratch my back by voting along with the SEC when they set the parameters for the football playoff. And, the Big East doesn't have a seat at all of those tables. So that's why it gets left out of some of these conversations sometimes. So, and then, sometime in the summer, we can go into the politics about what the NCAA tournament's going to look like 5-10 years down the line, but that's not a conversation for today.
Actually, no, I just want to bring up the quick point of look at some of these at-large teams they got in, and also take a look at the teams that declined to play in the NIT. If that doesn't tell you that this is just a setup for them to go forth and expand the tournament and, taking and ruining the one thing that I love every year. I'm heartbroken that our Seton Hall Pirates are not in the tournament, but I still love March Madness. It is the one thing that I know guaranteed will give me some kind of serotonin because it's the best postseason annual postseason that is in all of sport. I don't care what anyone says. March Madness trumps the World Series. It trumps the Super Bowl. I don't want to hear any counter argument to that. It's better than the Stanley Cup playoffs, although that's pretty good. It's better than the NBA playoffs, and it sure as hell is better than the college football playoff, at least from the perspective of the North American US based sports. Now, their agenda, you can see it. I don't even think they're trying to disguise it either. They know they want to expand the tournament to include more of these at-large teams. And with the NIT, St. John's, Pitt, Ole Miss, Memphis, just to name a few, those schools have all declined NIT bids. And Tom Crean, I love the soapbox he got on in terms of, the NIT and whatnot. Why, if you want to, if your teams, if you got players on your team that don't want to play in the NIT, they can opt out. That's fine. It's like, with bowl games, you see opt outs all the time. But they still play in the bowl games, even if they don't mean a lick. They still do. They can opt out. Coaches can opt out. If Rick Pitino didn't want to get on the sideline, let Steve Masiello coach whatever guys wanted to play in the NIT. And I think that's going to circle back to the point I want to make about Seton Hall being in the NIT. The fact that what I love about this group so much is even though they got just wrongfully screwed, fucked over, whatever term you want to use, the fact that they still want to play, even in the NIT, knowing that they can't play for a national championship, like they rightfully deserve to be, they still are taking this opportunity in stride, and they collectively, as a group, decided to continue playing and participate in the NIT. And knowing the heart of this group, and especially the heart of their leader, Shaheen Holloway, and the rest of that coaching staff, I think they're going to take this opportunity head on and try to make a statement to, well, first of all, the Big East and Shaheen Holloway should never be trifled with. And you don't screw over the Big East, you don't screw over Seton Hall, you don't screw over Shaheen Holloway. I think they're going to make the most of this opportunity, and they're not just going to phone it in. I think they're going to take the route that teams like Rutgers and Michigan and Clemson, they're going to veer away from what those teams did and phone it in, because I think all three of those teams lost in the first round of the NIT last year. You're not going to see that with Shaheen Holloway's group. I think they're going to be a team that's going to go out there with something to prove, just like they did since the beginning of November. I want to know your take on that, Pat.
I haven't really thought a lot. The only thing I thought in terms of the NIT was to make the point that the finals are being played out at Hinkle in Indianapolis, and that maybe Dre Davis is the guy who convinced them to want to advance to the NIT Final Four, because he'd have one more, assuming he doesn't come back next year, which that's a different topic for a different day. But he would get a chance if Seton Hall made it to the Final Four to get to play another game in front of his hometown fans out in Indianapolis and get a few hundred of them out to Hinkle for an NIT semifinal or an NIT final, which, very few people would care about otherwise. So maybe these next three games are for Dre Davis, who deserves it, by the way. I mean, the guy's been a warrior for the last 2 years and has done a lot to help the brand, so to speak. I think it probably helps Kadari Richmond to a certain extent, because it gives him a chance to showcase his skills if he is thinking about jumping to the pros this spring. It gives him a chance to impress some people. I don't know if it impresses him enough to get him drafted, but it might get him an invite to the NBA, roster combine, or so on and so forth. And then you get guys like Alamir Dawes and Jaden Bediako, who are also thinking about pro careers possibly. You get a better, they're looking maybe to get a better spot. Maybe they don't have to play in Greece. They can play in Germany, or they can play in France, or someplace like that, as opposed to a lower, professional tier. So these, I think individually the guys have something to play for. And I think that, again, they've come so together as a unit, more so than, let's say, St. John's, no disrespect, but, look, a lot of these St. John's guys were coming in for 1 year and being done. Dengle's gone, Ledlam's gone, Soriano's gone. So, and I don't think Darius Jenkins has really left either.
No,
so they're
doesn't.
all gone. They all came. They were hoping to go all in for Pitino. They made a very good effort to do so, but they just didn't give Pitino that NCAA bid that they all came in to get him this season. So now that they can't get that accomplished, they don't have nothing left to play for, because they have no connection between themselves other than the fact that they, came in for this 1 year assignment to try to prop Rick Pitino and prop themselves up. Whereas I think the commitment with at least Dawes and Davis and Richmond runs a little bit deeper than that. So I think that's why Seton Hall accepted the NIT bid, and hopefully it translates. Again, if they lose to St. Joseph's on Wednesday night, it's not going to change what I think of the team, and it's probably not going to change the impact of the season all that much. And even if they win the NIT, it's a nice looking banner you put in Walsh, but then the flip side of it is you have to bring back how painful watching these last 4 days have been, starting from, the loss to St. John's, and then the rumblings that Seton Hall was firmly in the field on Friday, but then one of the last 4 teams out, or one of the first 4 teams out, when you get to Sunday afternoon. So That there's a double edge to winning an NIT champion. Yeah, you get to be the quote unquote 69th best team in the country,
Nice.
and you can then it's a good argument to throw out when teams like Virginia and Texas A&M and Michigan State get knocked out in their first games. That the 69th. A lot of people think the winner of the NIT is better than a lot of the teams that lose in the first round, but then you still got stuck in the NIT to begin with. I mean, I don't know how much mileage Xavier got out of as great as that NIT championship Xavier got 2 years ago. And no disrespect to anybody, no disrespect to Xavier, but you know, how many people are going to remember that in 20 years? So I think the same thing happens. It's just unfortunately the NIT is. I mean, look, they want to get rid of the NIT at the end of the day. If somebody had put enough money up to get rid of the NIT, they would do it. So it's just sort of it's just the way it goes. You sort of NIT. Unfortunately, the first three letters everyone thinks about is not in tournament. So if you're gonna think like that, Seton Hall is not in tournament. So I'll follow the scores. I don't think I'll make a concerted. Maybe I'll make more of an effort if they make the semifinals, but I'll probably be too busy thinking about the real tournament, to be perfectly honest.
Counterpoint. Is it better to be invited or selected? Hmm? I had to make that point because I see
As
this
a
tweet every goddamn year, and it's still as funny as it was the first time. I saw it yesterday because Sacketology, who's the ultimate just troll who just tweets the same meme over and over again because he knows that's his shtick. Like invited better than selected, like with the the greater than sign. Like, yeah, I mean, just from a satirical standpoint, I wanted to do that, but honest to God, even if Seton Hall doesn't win the NIT. Hell, if even if they lose to St. Joe's, like I'm not going to be mad about it, and I'm not going to feel any type of way about it because of the fact that they are in a tournament that they shouldn't even be playing in the first place because of the fact that they should be in the big dance, not the NIT. And everyone and their mother, even the people in the committee, deep down, they probably know that too.
Yeah, it is what it's not a. These are not necessarily basketball decisions. They're other type of decisions, and it's unfortunate for those of us who are fans who think this should be about basketball when it's really about something else.
Amen to that. And you know what? I think that's a really good place to end this episode. I hope this episode was therapeutic for all of you Seton Hall fans and even just fans of the Big East, whether you be St. John's fans, Providence fans that felt that you also got wronged in all of this. You were, and your feelings are valid and they are actually right compared to, oh, you're living in a delusional world. Seton Hall, St. John's, and yes, even Providence deserve to be in this tournament, but yet we see some bullshit. Virginia, Michigan State, Texas A&M, to a lesser extent, Colorado State, and Florida Atlantic in the tournament, and yet you see Seton Hall, St. John's, and Providence not make it. St. John's didn't even make the first four out. That's even more inexplicable. But I've aired my grievances on that, and we've both aired our grievances here on this episode. So, any closing thoughts on how you feel about letting all this anger, frustration, just overall angst out over the last hour or so?
It's when you go. I think I went through the stages of grief on Saturday. And I think, I was drinking a little bit on Saturday too, by the way. I was down in Atlantic City, uh, of all things, to watch the Metro Atlantic tournament, seeing good old St. Peter's back in the dance.
Oh yeah.
Go Peacocks, strut up.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but, I think I went through more of the stages of grief on Saturday and just basically was glad I was sort of tuned out from all the other rumblings that was going on. And then unfortunately you get back home and you have to tune back into reality. So I was not, I think I probably had accepted it before 6 o'clock and I wasn't going to watch it, but then, my wife and my mother-in-law wanted to watch the selection show. So, and I had said, hey, look, I don't think Seton Hall's making it. So I've accepted our fate. I had accepted it by the time we got to Sunday morning. But, in reality, again, this is sort of what you put yourself through when you're a fan. You're gonna get a bad call like 1989 and John Cloud. You're gonna get a bad call at that point.
Mhm.
You're gonna get bad losses. Like we circle back to the bad loss against Rutgers to end the 2012 season, which knocked us out of the NCAA tournament. You're going to get bad draws, like getting forced to go out to Denver to play Gonzaga in the first round of the 2016 NCAA tournament. You're going to get a bad draw like that, and you're going to get this debacle. I would use the word cluster F, but I don't like to curse on the air. But you're going to get
I
this.
do.
Well, yeah, if you've listened for this last hour and some odd minutes and you don't know that Tim's not afraid to drop F-bombs, then you weren't really listening. But
I probably
yeah,
owe a
no.
fortune to the swear jar by now.
Yeah, put it all to Onward Setonia, by the way. If we put $1 jar, we could probably buy a transfer. But be that as it may, this is just the reality of where you're. I mean, I've been through this enough to be numb to it a little bit. And I feel bad. I feel bad for guys like JT and Cody and the Bluebeard Army who busted their butts all season to try to make this happen as fans, as students and fans, and didn't get the payoff that they rightfully deserve. That's who I feel bad for. The people who are in it, the players who did everything they could and then some and didn't get the reward that they were justly earned. Shaheen Holloway, who improved as a coach his second season from where he was year one. And all he gets is the only difference between what he gets this year and what he gets last year is a home game or two. So, these are the people who are in it, who are in the arena, so to speak, who got screwed more than someone like me who's watching from afar a little bit. And that's how it goes.
Yep, we just gotta, in terms of the 5 stages of grief, the last stage is accepting, and unfortunately, we all have to do that. So that's why, Wednesday night, I'll be watching on the Deuce ESPN2 when we play St. Joe's. And by the way, if you plan on going to Walsh, you're gonna get a show on top of the basketball game you're gonna see, because the St. Joe's Hawk will be there. He'll be flapping his arms for all 40 minutes.
He's the
I've seen
best.
it. I've seen it up close and personal because the St. Joe's women's team came to play Seton Hall in the NIT back in my senior year, and that props to every single person who's ever donned that Hawk costume. That they're troopers. They must have the arm strength of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Hulk Hogan, getting the 24-inch pythons and be able to like flap their arms for 40 minutes straight. So if you're gonna
They're in
go to the
better shape
game,
than Flagman, unfortunately. God bless Flagman, but St. Joe's, the Hawk is probably beats
yes,
Flagman in a fight unless he plays dirty.
unless he plays dirty, that's right. And you know what? Like, so if you're gonna go to the game in Walsh, be prepared for a sideshow. And you know what? Like, we have to accept what we've got. And you know what? We're gonna try to make the most of it. I want to see this team continue to win as much as possible, because I don't want the season to end. I wish we were playing in the NCAA's, but again, the more of this gritty team that we get to watch, a team that has had purpose all season long, even when we counted them out after they lost. They lost 4 games out of their first 9 to Rutgers, Baylor, USC, Iowa. But they never quit. We never quit on this team. So why should we stop now? Just keep supporting this team through the NIT, however long this run may go. And I hope it goes as long as possible, because this is a fun group to watch, and a group that everyone has rallied around all year. So don't stop now. Especially, you get the point. I feel like I'm rambling on, so I'm just going to stop it right here and now. So that's going to do it for this week's edition of Hoist the Colors. Again, we hope this is therapeutic and we hope you enjoyed this episode. For Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. Thanks for tuning in once again. And until next time, onward to Tonia. Go Pirates. And see you next time.